Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known.
Hello, I'm Lee Bortons. It's Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Kirsty Gilpin and I discuss lessons each week from our math curriculum for families with students that are enrolled in Classical Conversations communities. And for this summer, our club is working on games that help families, and I said families, not just students, but games that help families build math competency, because we know math can be fun. So Kirsty, what are we playing today?
So today we are looking at the multiplication table game and fractions games. And so we're excited about that. All right, there we go. So just a reminder, we are looking at 2 booklets per week and the games and activities. This week you have Babs and I leading you through that. And then we'll talk about what the published instructions are and then explore together. I think that's really been a blessing for all of us to explore together different ways we can adapt the games either to different domain students or just different things that we maybe are trying to practice in our homes. So without further ado, let's take a look at our multiplication table game. So I apologize if I sound a little funny. I picked up my daughter's cold, so feel a little croaky. So the instructions for the multiplication table game are really designed to give you a way just to practice together multiplication facts from 1 times 1 up to 15 times 15. And one of the things I really like about this is that you can choose the facts that you want to practice by choosing one of the numbers between 1 and 15 as your first factor. So this is another game that we're going to put into a sheet protector. And so we can either use a dry erase or a wet erase marker. The nice thing about the wet erase marker is that you don't accidentally smudge it. And so as we put the game into our sheet protector, and then again, depending on our students, I might have one student who's still just working on getting the 2s and 3s down, while another student is maybe really working on the 14s and 15s. And so this is a game that we can play together and I really adapt to the students at our table by saying, okay, Lee, today you're going to practice your 2s, and Babs, you're going to practice your 15s. And then the instructions here to shuffle a deck of cards where the jack is the 11, the queen is the 12, the king is the 13, and ace is 1. Notice you don't get the 14 and 15 there. So some things you could consider doing is using your jokers and maybe letting, if you have 2 jokers, one of your jokers be 14 and the other one be 15. Or you could just use dice, right? If you we've talked before how we could use dice, and I looked at that app so I could get a 15-sided dice in order to play this. So then if, let's say Lee and I are doing this together and Lee is doing her 2s and I'm doing my 14s, I would flip a card. I'm not sure if somebody is accidentally drawing on the screen there, so I'm going to restart my share here. I'm not sure what I did to lose that.
I was wondering what was happening, if we were having a fit or what was going on.
Yeah,
I thought maybe Kirsty was getting upset with something and maybe she was just, I'm drawing on the board.
All right. I don't know why it is not letting me share this screen, so let me try one more time. I only have that screen is there. Let me come back to you guys and share from fresh. And there we go. Hopefully you are seeing it now.
I want to make a comment, Kirsty. For some of you may wonder about the directions on the back. Many times we just made up directions that were easy with dice and cards. There were things that I've used in the past or Kirsty suggested with her children, just to try to make something that was adaptable for mobile children with mobile skills. So you will not be able to find these instructions somewhere on the internet like they are, sanctified or standardized. They're just our ideas. So feel free to make up your own ideas if the game's not working for you.
And this
So
is such a great chart just to have. Oh my goodness, like how easy would it have been for me to make this? But I never did, and this is wonderful.
So we're now practicing, one of us is practicing the 2s and the other is practicing the 13s. And now we're just going to flip our cards. And so I flip a 4 and Lee is going to say 2 times 4
Is 8.
is 8. And she's going to go ahead and cross that off. All right, so I'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to flip a card and I get 11. Now, if I'm not, right, if I'm maybe still developing, I can see that 13. And if I go down to my 11 here, right, 13 times 11 is 143. And so I can cross that off. But I've got this, right, by looking at my rows and my columns, they're going to help me to develop them. So the game isn't necessarily to test your ability to multiply, but to give you practice in multiplying and saying that fact out loud. 13 times 11 is 143. And then let's say we turn another card over, and this time it's a 3. And so Lee says, well, 2 times 3 is
6.
6. And again, she might need to say, okay, I'm working in my 2, so I'm going to come here to 3, and that gives me 6. Now, let's say I turn over another jack, and I have 13 times 11, and I have already turned that over. And so now can't cross off anymore, and so Lee would win. Right. And so there's one way to keep this really simple and to make a game out of it as we practice. Again, using our multiplication table to practice and say those multiplication facts out loud, right? So 13 times 11 is 143. So the goal isn't just to say, oh, 143, but to say the fact so that we're actually getting that fact into our memory, right? Into our memoria.
And one
Could
thing,
she
there's,
also,
I was going to, there's quicker ways to practice your multiplication table than this, but what the reason you want to do this is you want to give the students a reason to look hard at the multiplication table so that then you can start asking them questions about patterns and numbers around the numbers. And so it's an introductory way. It's kind of tedious to play it this way, but we've made it so that there's an actual winner, which kids like to have that. And then I would suggest once they're pretty good at reading the table, that's when you can say, all right, let's look at the other aspects of the table.
Well, I love the visual with it too, because oftentimes, like if we're doing flashcards, we don't see the solution. And sometimes I think our brain needs to see the solution as well. And so I love just the visual of this for maybe more visual learners.
We talked about this before, but I think, you know how that question keeps coming up about, can I have more calculation? Like, this is a great way to practice your calculation.
and I was just thinking if so you got the joker again, or I'm sorry, the jack again. So now it's 11 times 13 times 11, but you could have your students say, okay, what's the commutative law, and find the other factor, I mean, the other product on there that is from 11 and 13.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, there's a lot of, there's a lot of ways, and I'm going to share some of the things that I thought about other ways to use this or take this game. But I really love the fact that when we think about math games, we tend to think we need to play with students who are at my level, right? And this is a game that I can play with students that are at different levels, right? In their calculation ability, different levels in their calculation speed, because we're not necessarily prioritizing speed. We're not necessarily prioritizing that they know their facts, but that they can find them on the table. And so it's really going to help provide that scaffolding for the students who are still developing those skills while emphasizing that. So this is really one of those great games that you can sit everybody at the table, right? And even dad, right? Maybe you give dad the 15s and tell him he's got the really hard ones. And even if he doesn't remember his 15s himself, right, he can use the multiplication table to play the game with everybody else. So these are some of the thoughts that I had. One, this is a great, as we just said, this is a great visual to transition from skip counting to looking at the facts, right? So if we go back and look at this, notice whether I look at my columns, right? Whether I'm looking down a column, right? I'm skip counting my 15s. I'm skip counting my 14s, or my rows, right? I can read across a row and skip count. This is going to help us for those students who are making that transition from skip counting to multiplication to see that skip counting pattern, right? And so they've maybe memorized that. And so they can see that skip counting pattern, but they can also now go, oh, well, it's 2 because 2 times 1 is 2. And then 4 because 2 times 2 is 2. And so now I'm going to be able to help those students connect what they have memorized to skip counting to the facts in a really great, clear visual way that's going to help them make that connection.
The other thing you can do is for the students who's maybe older, and they're struggling with the math curriculum, very, very often it's because they do not know their multiplication facts and they think they do. So this might be a good week with that child, or maybe it's second, third time through the math map, or they're just beginning. To say, you know, we're just going to do 12 of the 16 pages, and on the last day, we're just going to play these games and get all the facts really hammered in. Now that we've seen where you're struggling and where you're strong, the opposite way is to take the first day and do the games and the math facts, so that maybe they have an easier time with the lesson. Either way is fine, and that's where, you know, it takes a wise parent to figure out what's the best way to show my child how to use their time. Because sometimes preparation helps, and sometimes you have to struggle before you want the preparation.
So another way, you know, and so we've talked about, you know, that this game is a great way to scaffold those developing students as they're developing that grammar of the multiplication facts. But we've also talked about how does this help students who are now starting to get some mastery of those facts. So some of our, perhaps our challenge domains, especially as we're getting into binomial and polynomials, we might say, well, what is it that this is, how does this help those students? And so one of the thoughts that I had was that it helps us to look at the factorization. And so we can look at a number and then identify the factors and then keep identifying the factors of the factors, right? So one of the things that that Lee has included in several different places, especially in week 5, is the prime factorization, right? And how do I figure out the prime factorization? So there's lots of ways we can do that, but I really like the idea of using my multiplication table because I can take a number, let's say 144, and if we wanted to make it a game, right, you could just drop a dime, right? And wherever that dime lands, that's the number that you're going to do. Well, 144 is 12 times 12. So now I would ask my students, well, can 12 be factored? So I'm going to look here and I'm going to look for all the places I see 12. Well, 12 is 12 times 1. Oh, here's another one. It's 2 times 6. Here's another one. It's 3 times 4, right? So now I'm starting to see all of these different factors I might have of 12. And so then I might say, okay, well, if it's 2 times 6, let's look at 2, right? 2 and 6 are factors of 12. Well, 2 is 2 times 1. So that means it's prime, right? So there's one of my prime factors. And then 6, if I find my 6 here, 6 is 2 times 3. So again, I could look at my 2 and I could say, oh, well, I have another 2. So I'm going to put my little 2 there to say I had 2 2s. and 3 is 3 times 1, so that's prime. So I can work backwards on my multiplication chart here to keep saying, okay, what are the factors of this number? Well, do those factors have factors, right? And so keep working back to help your students see, right, some of those patterns that exist in, um, sorry, excuse me, some of those patterns that exist in factoring our numbers. So I wouldn't
Kirsty,
necessarily,
you were at the two to me, because it's 2 times 2 times 3 is 12. You were still looking for 12.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So that gives me my 12, but then I know I have another 12, right? Because I've only done the 112. So now I would do the other 12 and I would have to go through and I would say, oh, well, for the other 12, I would actually have all of those factors again. So we're, again, it's just this idea of helping the students to look at this and see those patterns. And so for that student who thinks they've got it, right? They're like, Mom, I know all my facts. I've got this. Okay, we'll work backwards, right? Find all the factors of 144. And then at the end, when you think you have them, so maybe you have a student who forgot about the second 12 and they go, oh, well, I found them and it's 2 squared times 3. And you say, okay, well, multiply that. And then they do, and they find out that they were wrong. Now they've got to go back and do that other 12, right? And find out that it would actually be, right, that squared, right? 2 to the 4th times 3 squared, in order to get that. So it's a good, again, I think it's a really great way to encourage our students to be thinking differently about their numbers. So when they think that they've got it all, right, you're pushing them to work backwards the other way, right? Now, when they get here, you might say, okay, well, what are some factors here? Well, 3 squared is 9, right? And that's off of our chart, right? So we don't have 9, that doesn't qualify of our chart. But ask them, well, did it make sense to you, right? Would 9 be a factor of 144? Would you have ever guessed that, right? And so now that student who really thinks, I've got all this, we're pushing them now to think a little bit more deeply about their numbers. And then the other idea that I had, so there's an idea of factorization, and then there's another idea of a division, right? And division, oops, sorry, going ahead to Babs here. Division is a little bit trickier because not everything divides evenly. So let's go back and again, you could use a button or a dime and drop it to pick a card. Or I think this is really kind of interesting because there's a strategy involved for that student who really thinks that they're mastering their calculation facts. There's a strategy to pick a number that's going to have multiple divisors, right? So if we go back, so let's look at 144 again. That might be a good number. If I had played this and done my factoring, and so I know this is 2 to the 4th times 3 squared, right? What are some of my factors? Well, I've talked about the fact that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, and then we found out 9, right? We might see that 36 is also a factor, although that's not one that we're likely to see. And so we start to see what some of our divisors are. So now I could play this as a game where if I flip a card, let's say I flip a 9, I could say, okay, well, if I got a 9, so I can cross off 144 and 144 divided by 9. And that's not necessarily going to show up on our chart, so I wouldn't get to get another number. But I could keep doing that, right? And so I might want to pick another number. Now, would I want to pick 9, for example? Is 9 a good number to pick, right? If I was looking for a strategy, because it's only going to be divisible by 1, 3, and 9. So again, just trying to think, how could I take this game for those students who maybe think that they know it, and say, okay, well, let's see how well you really know it. You pick a number and then you flip a card to see if it can be divided. And if it can, then you get to cross off 2 numbers. And then you go back and forth. So it's just another way to to do this, right? And then if you can't, then you have to keep waiting until you can divide that number. You don't get to pick a new number until you've divided that number. So again, just some different ways that we thought about that we could take this and use this hundreds chart with all different ages of our students to really encourage them to not only know how to multiply, but to start to develop a sense of those numbers, right? Which ones are divisible by what are the factors, right? And those are the same questions. So
This
what other,
chart's also, I would say, a good one for when we are doing the introductory exordium on integers. You might want to sometimes pick them from off of this table, and this is where they can say at that point all these interesting ideas Kirsty's given us. You could just pick one number and talk about 'em.
anything else, any other ideas that anybody would like to share about using the multiplication table?
You could do a even simpler version of a division game by just giving them a number and they have to tell you like if I say 132, they have to look and see, oh, that's 11 times 12, or, like that would be.
Yeah, that's great. Recognizing that I can, if I said 132, well, what's 132 divided by 12? And using that same scaffolding idea of using my rows and columns to find the quotient.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, are all the games the same on every level of the math map?
Yeah, so your children can play them together and they'll have their own copy.
Okay.
I really see the value, like something as simple as the multiplication table, where a student may be very familiar, comfortable with, and then yet they can take what is familiar into learning something new, into the unfamiliar. I really love that is a potential here with all different ages in the same household.
Yeah, there's so much, right? You could go through and talk about the squares, talk about the patterns, right? Why do the squares only appear once on here? Why do all of our other numbers appear at least twice on here? So that, talking about the commutative law and so forth. So yeah, it's amazing to me how something that seems so simple as just having a multiplication chart can really lead to so many conversations with our students about the very nature of numbers and just the beautiful arrangement, right? So if you ask your students to color, right, you could ask your younger students to find all the numbers that end in 0 and color those one color. And then everything that ends in 5, a different color. And then everything that's even, right? And see what patterns you notice when you start coloring, right? If I started to color these based off of different criteria, right, with my younger students, that alone might help me to see some patterns that I can't see just looking at everything in black and white. Great. Well, I am going to go ahead now and turn it over to Babs. Babs, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Okay, so this is week 6 fractions. And so the directions say that you roll roll four dice, and then sum any 2 of those and write them as a ratio. So if you roll 4, it doesn't really matter what you choose to put together, but you just choose 2 of those and you add them up, and then you decide, you decide what denomination you want to add them up, and then you write it as a ratio and you put the smaller value on the left. And then you name the equivalent fraction or the decimal or the percent. And then you can check this back page to see if you're correct. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward game. And I love this back picture because there's lots of stuff on here that I think will be familiar to the kids, but also some things they probably don't know that are unfamiliar. And so you can kind of do the same thing we do with our iPages, right? We ask them, okay, what's familiar? What have you seen before? Or what are things that are brand new that you were like, oh, I didn't know that was the answer to that, right? So if you played with multiple kids, you could say, let each kid, pick a different denomination to add together. So in the example up there, they've got, four to eight. And so they've reduced it to 1/2, and then they have 0.5 or 5/10 and 50%. But another way you could add the 6 and 3 together and the 2 and 1 together and have a different set, right? 3 to 9 and 3/9. So if you had multiple kids, you could, let them pick out different ways to add those numbers together. And so that's really the basis of the game. But my first thought when I looked at this was, if I read the directions and my student's like, I don't know any of these, like, how could I even play this game? Like, what could I do? And so that made me start thinking about, okay, what do we already have that could be beneficial? So, Kirsty, if you go to the next page. So the flashcards were very exciting to me. I pulled out the fractions cards because I haven't been memorizing those yet. I'm almost done with the notations. And it had lots of things I already knew, but also a lot of vocabulary I didn't know. And so we could let our students drill, that has a visual, and then it has all the different ways that you can write this. So I could write this particular circle as 1/1, or I could write 1-1 or 1.0 or 100%. Like, there's 4 different ways. So I could drill my students with those cards. And then there's also lots of new grammar that you could try to load in or review. So if they already know what a numerator and a denominator is, then that's just review. But for me, I didn't remember that in a ratio, the first number was an antecedent and the second number was a consequent. I was like, what is it? I've never heard that before. So that's new grammar to me. So you could load up new grammar or just review, and do that, with your students who aren't really sure where to go. All right, let's go look at the next slide. So another thing you can do is practice reading. And what made me think of this was I was talking with Kirsty and I was kind of practicing, and I said, well, how would you say the ones that have the repeating, right? And so like 33.3 and it has the line over it, right? And so we were talking through it that you could say 33.3% repeating. Like, some people say 33 and 3/10 repeating, but is the 3/10 really repeating? So that's kind of tricky. So it might be better to say 33.3% repeating. We were kind of going back and forth on that, but just practicing, how do I read that? Right? Do I know how to read 0.375? Do I know how to read that is 375 thousandths? Do I know that? Does my student know that? So instead of drilling or playing a game where they're having to, calculate something in their head or pull from their grammar, you could just let them find it on this chart and practice reading it. So this was an example I just pulled where I just rolled 4 dice and then I chose 2 to add together, 5 and 4 and 4 and 6, and it became 9/10. And then I found that on my chart, and so that I could practice that it was 9/10 or 90%. So that's something that you could do with your younger kids, is just have them find them, and then you can practice reading it together. All right, let's look at the next one. So some variations, you could use playing cards instead of dice to get some higher numbers. And we could pull in the king, queen, and jack, that we used from the other games. And then there's this special dice. And I was telling Kirsty that I have some of these somewhere, but I cannot find them. They used to be in my tutor bag and they're not in my tutor bag anymore. So I don't know what happened to them. So I might have to buy some more. But I loved using those for N2K when we were doing essentials, because we had students that wanted higher numbers, right? like higher numbers to work with. And so you could have these fun dice that different shapes and have higher numbers and different sides. So you could always do that to have higher numbers and then practice reducing the fraction so that it would be on the chart. Okay. Okay, so a couple ways we could make it more like a game is that you could cross off the fractions that you have and kind of see how many you could knock off. You could divide into teams. And so maybe give each team 5 minutes and say, okay, here's 5 minutes and 4 dice. And you guys, see how many can you knock off, in 5 minutes. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier, having the students practice reading it, but maybe not just reading it, but they say aloud their answer and practice using the term. So if I have 2 to 3 as my ratio, I could say 2 is my antecedent. And I think I'm supposed to say 3 is my consequent, right? Or I could say, if I want to make it as a fraction, I could say 2 is my numerator and 3 is my denominator. So maybe kind of like what we were doing in foundations, where we would have to say, we were learning our facts and we would have to say it like a catechism. We have to say it in a complete sentence. We could say, use the answer that we found, but we say it as using it in the grammar terms, because a lot of these words are going to be new to them. And so again, I didn't know about the antecedent and consequent. So I feel like I need to start doing that, because that way it'll help me remember what those grammar terms are. And then we talked about the flashcards, how you can use that to check your work or review grammar. And I did find this cool website. If you don't have the fun dice that you want to make it, higher numbers, it's called rolladie.net. And you can choose how many sides of dice, how many sides your dice has and how many dice you want to do. And then it'll roll it for you. And so then you could use that. So I thought that was a cool site to use in case I didn't have the fun dice and I wanted to make it, make those numbers higher. So. All right, I think that's all.
Babs, Nicole has her hand raised. Do you have a question, Nicole?
No, actually, I have a statement in line with the higher numbers. I was kind of doing the whole queen equals something and jack equals this and king equals that. And I got annoyed and I created my own cards and had them printed, and it's like a set of cards, and it has 4 different suits, and it goes up to 1 through 15.
Oh, nice.
And that I use that for like dice. Like if I want to pull a number that's bigger, instead of rolling dice, I will use the cards, and it's easy. I mean, like, it's easy enough to ask me for some, but it's also easy enough to like create something in Canva if you're creative in that way. And that helps with the bigger numbers, because I noticed that my kids weren't getting practice with the 14s and 15s. And we love the Quick Flip arithmetic book. Like, I recommend that book to everybody. I'm always like, go get that Quick Flip arithmetic book if you don't have it, and get you some games. And a lot of these games in Math Map are very similar to those, or even some of the same games in that one. And when you have cards or dice or something that go up to 14 or 15, it makes those numbers just as easy as the smaller numbers, because the kids have been seeing them ever since they were 4 or 5 years old. So that was my thought about the 14s and 15s.
That's a good idea. And if you want to make your own cards, you could also add ones that say like reverse. I'm thinking of Uno. You can, instead of reverse, you could put in cards that say commute or associate, or some other option to manipulate beyond the basic facts.
Yeah, I like the idea of making your own cards, and you can make it, because I always forget what king, queen, and jack are supposed to be. If I haven't written it on the board and we're doing it in class, I'll forget. Oh, which one is that supposed to be?
Well, those are good ideas, Babs. Thanks.
It just makes you think about, I don't know, I just keep going back to this thing about people talking about calculation, and like there's so much that you can practice just with these 2 games. The one Jill did last week was a great example of practicing calculation. So, and if you think about, let's say you're not in a place this week to do a lot of the lesson pages, talk about the artwork and play the games. And then you've got got lots of calculation and you've got the big ideas, right? The main things that we're trying to find God in math. Like that's going to be known because you're going to talk about the artwork. And I mean, you can even talk about this after you play the game, right? Because you've already stirred up their brain by talking about the art and the connections. So
Something you can share with the students is like, I think about my second son, our second son, John, he's in construction, and boy, does he know his fractions because of all the cuts he's had to make over 25 years. It's very important.
No, I was thinking that, you know, again, just I love Babs pointing out how important it is just to know the grammar of fractions, right? Numerator and denominator, unit fraction, and
Identity fraction.
identity fraction, and being able to talk about the antecedent and the consequent, or writing our fractions in all these different ways and understanding it's all division, I think is really, really helpful. And then again, thinking of those students who maybe you're trying to push them a little bit farther. So if you have students who are confident in their fractions and in naming their fractions, you could use your fraction chart here and say, okay, well, I want to now encourage you to add, right? So let's say that we went through and the goal was your fraction, your dice, and you have your 4 dice, and your goal is to use those to knock off one of these boxes, right? So maybe Lee rolls 2/12 and she says, okay, well, I can knock off 1/6, you know, and so she puts an L there. And then Babs rolls and she gets 3/4. And so she gets this one. And so that one's knocked off. And then maybe I roll what Babs had here and I got my 9/10. And so I'm going to cross this one off and put my name, you know, my letter there. Now, what would be fun is at the end, right, for those students, if you're going through and playing this way, you could just say, well, how many fractions did you get, right? So maybe you get to a point where, you know, Lee's next roll, she can't make a fraction that hasn't been, you know, already crossed off. So she loses that turn. And so that's one way we could play, where you just count up how many different fractions were you able to knock off. But then if you really wanted to push your students a little bit farther, you could say, okay, well, add up all the fractions that you got, right? So, right, and here we can start to see, looking at my fraction chart, right, the values, the relative values. So 9/10, right, that's going to be bigger than 3/4 and bigger than 1/6. So that would be a high value fraction for me to try to claim for myself, right? And so again, there becomes this little bit of strategy, right, that you want to get those bigger fractions so that when you add them together, right? Or you could make it even more interesting. You could say, well, you're going to add the ones that are shaded in gray and subtract the ones that are in white. And so that way we can start to encourage our students to take that next step. And so we played our game and we've crossed off our fractions and we practiced. And now you say, okay, well, now go add them together. Right? And that takes our skills to that next level again. And so I just think these, again, you know, the games, looking at the fractions chart and making it into a game, right, is going to help our students to practice, but still have fun, right, and still build that memoria, but also do it in context, right? So we know that our flashcards, we've talked about this before, right? The flashcards are great for loading memoria, but they do it out of context. And then on our I squared and I cubed pages, we start to see some things that are in context. But our games are another place where we can see and look at those calculations in context, right? So as I look here, right, at my fractions chart, I'm going to start to get, just by looking, right, well, which one is farther to the right? It's going to give me a sense of how big that is relative to my other fractions, right? So a student might not know, like, oh, what's bigger, 3/5 or 4/6? Well, I'm not sure. Well, if I look here, right, 3/5 is to the left of 4/6, so it's going to be less than, right? Because this is going to match my, if I was to collapse this down, it's going to make a number line of all my fractions. Right. So here's a way, by putting it into context, by putting it into an arrangement, we're actually going to help our students to build that number sense over time, that they wouldn't get.
Would it be
That
too,
is
Sorry.
genius.
would it be too crazy to like cut up the page and like put them over top of each other? Because I think
Go
that would
for
be
it.
helpful to see if I don't know which is bigger, right? And it's, I mean, I can see them here, but you know, when you get down to the bottom, it's a little harder to see how they match up to the ones kind of in the middle. So I was just thinking, what if I cut it up and then I could put them on top of each other to show them like a manipulative, show them what's bigger and what's smaller.
You can even have a 5 or 6-year-old cut them up just for cutting practice so they can stay on the line. Right? It doesn't have to even be a math number. So, Kirsty, Nina's asked if we can read a row, and I would like to give that a try. May I do that?
So you froze momentarily. Can you say
Oh.
that again?
Nina would like me to read a row to you. Can I try?
Yes.
Okay, so she said the sevens, and so I'm going to show you how I learned to read them, not just to read them. So let's take the very first number that begins with a 0.142857 with the winniculum on top. So I would say 1/10, 14 hundredths, 142 thousandths, 1,428 ten thousandths, 14,285 hundred thousandths. And now I lost myself. What's last? But do you see how you have to build? That's how you get to the place where you can read them. Kirsty, finish that number. Can you read it?
So it would be 142,857 millionths.
Millions. That's where I lost my words. Do
That's
you
why
want to try one, Nina?
Sure. I've been trying to memorize these and I'm like, it's like, that's very challenging. So for 2 sevens, that is equal to, that's the same number, 28,000, no, 285,714 million.
Good. How about Babs? You do the
This is
next
good.
one.
okay, 428,571 million.
And Gianna
571,428 millionths.
and Leslie.
714,285 millionths.
And I'm guessing Nicole's driving, so I'll try the next one. 857,142 millionths. So we just went over 2 ways. Hearing us say the exact same thing and always ending in millions, you hear a pattern. And then I showed you how to build. So there's at least 2 ways, I'm sure. And then there's just memorizing it visually. So whatever works for your kids.
I was going to say, because this is visual, so Kirsty, you were talking about how the flashcards are out of context, and that's great to practice that way. But we were a little overwhelmed with the fraction flashcards because we don't have the context. And so this, when I look at this, I can see, oh, the sevens, like it felt like there were 7,000 different fractions that I was memorizing. But really, I look at this, it's the sevenths that are long, and that number repeats over and over. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. It's always in that same order is what I'm trying to say. So there's a pattern even to what the sevenths, calculate out to. And then I can see that there's multiple times where 66.6 repeating is on this chart, like every third row actually, or whatever. Like I'm just seeing so many patterns. It's like a chart A in a way. It like puts it all there where I can see it all at one time and I can say, oh, that's really not that much. And then when I do the flashcards, I'm like, oh, that's this piece right here. And I don't know, that's so helpful. So helpful.
The challenge you could do with your older children is say, okay, take this chart and you see how it goes out to 1.0. Well, you're supposed to know your multiplication table is up to 15. So I want you to keep going to 1.5 and see what you can do with it.
I just think if anybody ever tells you, oh, I'm good with fractions, we should show them this chart. And be like, well, do you know your fractions? Because that's to see, I feel like the fractions flashcards are a little overwhelming to me because I don't know. I don't know that point 0.7 repeating is 7/9. I don't know that. I don't know that off the top of my head. And so I feel like that's something I want to know, because if I see a fraction, I want to know what the percentage is, or I want to know what the ratio is. And so I just think that's, to me, that's like the first step. Like, I feel like that's something I want to memorize now so that I can help my student when he sees it, and he'll say, "Oh, how did you know that they all go together?" Well, I just memorized it.
And
So,
how easy is it to memorize the nines when you look at this? Like, look at that. Look how simple it is.
oh yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just they all 2/9 is 0.2 repeating, or 22.2% repeating. 3/9, 0.3. It's just, it makes it so, the pattern makes it so much easier to commit to memory.
Mm-hmm.
It's also
I think
on 0.9 repeating, which is 9/9 equals 1. That's a little bit of a mystery there. That
My
0.9 also repeating also equals 1. And everybody says they like math because the answers are always the same. And we haven't even left 9 yet, and it's making trouble.
my challenge 3 class has an ongoing argument about that particular box that you just mentioned.
So I think something just that we just talked about, right? We've all just said, oh, these flashcards, they feel overwhelming, right? And I I want to encourage us to remember that grammar, there is no such thing as hard grammar and easy grammar, right? It's either familiar or it's unfamiliar. And so the fractions, right, I can memorize anything. When it's more familiar, it feels easier to memorize, right? Because I'm already on the journey towards memorization. And so that's maybe when we look at this graphically, it's helping us to start that journey towards memorization. But for families who are using those fractions flashcards and going, this is really overwhelming, right? Well, it makes me go back to my early days as a foundations tutor. And how many timeline cards did we memorize each week?
7.
7, right? I didn't get a whole 120 the very first time and say, okay, we're going to memorize 120 thing. Right? We did 7. And did I even do 7 in a row? No, I would say, okay, here's our first timeline card. Everybody say, right, Age of Ancient Empires. And all my kids would go, Age of Ancient Empires. And then I'd say the next one, right? And then I'd say, okay, now let's go back and let's do timeline card 1 and 2 together. And now we're going to do 1, 2, and 3 together. And we would build, right? And that week we would do 7. Now my last couple of years in tutoring and foundations, I had the master's level kids, and so for them it was familiar, and so we might play games, right, where we would go and we would review. But in that introductory time where we were loading the new grammar, it was just 7. So now think about if you only pull out 7 fraction flashcards, right? Don't pull out the whole deck the first time, just pull out 7 and say, okay, let's say this one together. Now let's say this one and this one together, right? And treat it like the things that we learned about loading new grammar with our students. Because what happens is we sit down with our flashcards. Oh, I'm so excited. I have a new flashcard deck. Let's just start going through. And after the first couple, the kids have forgotten any of them and they're saying it and they're not remembering anything, right? So go back to those things that we learned in foundations. And I think about this a lot, that as we, a lot of us have our challenge directors or we have challenge age students and we're looking ahead, right? This year, we've been looking at this from the perspective of a challenge A class. And so we have students that we're like, oh, we're in challenge now. And sometimes it's tempting to forget all of those things we learned in foundations. But foundations was so important because it taught us, right, how to load grammar. And so this is not, I'm moving on from foundations. This is, I'm bringing foundations with me and now building on top of that. And so when you encounter something that feels overwhelming, think, how did I do this with my littles, right? How did I make this less overwhelming for my littles? Well, I did fewer, right? And I did lots of repetition. So do that with your older students. And not just to help them memorize their fractions at 13, but because we really want to encourage our students to recognize that those skills that we have been giving them are lifelong skills, right? Those skills for memorizing were not for when they were 5, 6, 7, and 8, but for when they're 25 and 26 and 27 and 28. Right. When, like this semester, my daughter's doing kinesiology as one of her required courses. And I said, well, remember from challenge A, right? What did you do? You drew those body systems. So I want you to, like I said, go back and draw. You love to draw. So go and draw all of those muscles and tendons that you have to memorize, right? Take these skills that you've been learning and bring them into challenge and into college and into our lifetime. I just want to encourage you that we collectively have learned a lot from foundations that's not to be left behind, but to be built on and brought with.
I love that. So before we get our next game, I wanted to give a kind of a car school activity that relates to the Babs, and that's when you're driving around with your little guys, ask them to read you correctly the gas prices, because they often have fractions or decimals in them.
That's a good one. They can help you compare which one has the cheapest gas.
My kids used to get so angry because they thought it was like false advertising, that it would be advertising like 268, but it was really 269 because that 1/10 of a penny. So they used to get really angry about that.
Good.
So those were our games for today. Just reminding you of the resources as you are finishing out your challenge year or your foundations year. Foundations may be wrapped up, but I know we've still got some challenge communities that are finishing up. And again, enjoy the fact that once you finish week 30, you're finished with your math map booklets in the conventional sense. And so as we look at this summer, right, and we've talked about this each week, right, why are we doing the games on the back of the booklets for our summer book club? Because this is a way that you can take the math map and use it all summer long to keep those math ideas fresh with your students, but maybe without looking like it's looked all year, right? So go back and play some of those games you haven't played before, or play them in a different way, right? So imagine maybe you played with the multiplication table back in week 5. Well, pull it back out now over the summer and see, what did your students learn, right? What other patterns can they notice, right? How could you use it differently over the course of the summer so that we're keeping those ideas fresh for our students without feeling like we're doing the same thing, because we all do appreciate a break, right? A Sabbath is sort of that little bit of a break and doing something a little bit differently. So it doesn't necessarily mean we don't do anything, right? I don't think that right, we saw that Jesus, right? He said, no, you can still do things on the Sabbath, right? But it's that idea that it might be different. And so taking a Sabbath season doesn't mean that you throw the math away for the summer, but we can do things a little bit differently for our students. And then, so we've got our book club continuing Wednesdays at 1, and those archives are all there. And then looking ahead, so we have the next 3 weeks, we'll be working through lessons 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12. And then on May 21st, Shauna is going to lead everybody through an exciting, detailed tour of the companion. So if that's something that you maybe didn't take advantage of during the course of the year, Shauna's going to dive deep into looking at some of the resources that are in the companion, because now is a great time to go and click around and discover some of the resources that are there. And then we'll be back to our games and activities on May the 28th. And of course, we want to always end every week with the opportunity for you to ask questions. And so that's the time that we're at. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask, or ideas they want to share?
Can I answer a question real quick that I feel like we're getting a lot of? So now that a lot of people just bought the new complex, you know, the updated complex this year, and they're starting to play around with the companion, they might notice there are differences because right now in the companion, it's still aligned with the current booklets that they're using in community. And so that's one thing, a question that we get is, why does my booklet look different than what's in the companion? So I think the goal is that about June the 1st of June, we're going to update the companion with the new booklet. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to everybody who bought the new booklets and they're already excited and trying to dig in. But and they're not big giant changes. They're just a couple of things here and there. And they're like, oh, well, you know, is there something wrong or is it going to be updated? And so it will be updated, but around the 1st of June, I think is the goal.
Good. Yeah, for these development years, which are going to be another 3 or 4 more years, the companion will always be a little bit behind because we're taking your feedback and updating it as you get the materials in your hand. So Kirsty is a genius, but she's not a foreseer. She's not sure of all your problems, every single one of them. So that will be the case for quite a while. So thanks, Babs, for bringing that up. But the differences should be either very, very minor or a simpler problem or similar problem that was maybe a better way to instruct the same concept.
Nicole, you have your hand up.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm in my car, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I have a question and a comment. My question is, I've been hearing this June 1st date, and I probably should know, but it's when I went this morning, I was doing the Math Map at Home presentation, and I went to show them about the companion at the end, and there are multiple levels of the book available in the companion now that weren't a month ago. And then there are some we're waiting for digitally that aren't on there yet. Is that June 1st? Is that when all of that is supposed to be kind of available and done, or like what
Yes. Yep. So we wanted to go ahead and for those families who were buying those other domains, so digits, integers, fractions, and monomials, we wanted to go ahead and have those domains live for them so that they could see the kinds of support that they would get. And then those digital lessons will become available June 1st.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And my statement is it's about, you were talking about pulling, like we're building on the foundation, we're not leaving the foundation behind. I just wanted to say my son, my 11-year-old, he did Mega Memory Master a few weeks ago, and of course that's awesome, and he memorized all those things. But the thing that I was most proud of was the skill of doing hard things, because for the last 4 weeks his room has been clean, and I know that y'all know how miraculous that is for an 11-year-old boy to keep his room clean. And I mean, like, I could walk in the room and vacuum it now. Like, I used to have to like step over things and be like, will you please come clean? And for 4 weeks it's been clean. And I finally asked him, hey Marcus, what happened? Like, why are you so diligent all of a sudden about your room? And he said, because of Mega Memory Master. And I said, why? He said, well, I said, what does that mean? He said, because I'm convinced I can do hard things. That's literally what he said to me. He's like, now I know I can do hard things. And for the longest time, he just thought it was so hard to keep his room clean. And now he's like, yeah, it's hard, and I can do hard things. And he actually walked his little brother, just turned 9 yesterday, but this was 4 weeks ago. He's technically 8, through purging the room. And they were like, okay, let's not just get rid of things we don't want. We want everything. Let's get rid of things we don't use. So they are starting to think about things that are hard for them because they did something that was hard. And I just wanted to reiterate, like, it's not just the information sometimes, it's the character that goes along with it, and it's the building up on top of the foundation that really makes the difference. I'm in awe, and I'm super grateful. I'm so grateful. I don't know what to do.
Well, we're grateful for you. So well done, Mama, and give your boys a well done from the Math Map Club team.
Thank you.
Kirsty, I just wanted to, about that June 1st date. It's not everything is going to load come June 1st. And so June 2nd, the expectation is that all 30 booklets across all the different, those domains, it's a gradual loading up
Yeah.
that will start in the first week of June and then continue through the summer and the fall, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So we're, I think that we'll have quite a bit that will go live on June 1st, but yes, we'll be continuing to add. So one of the things, if you have been, somebody who has been deep in the math, in the math map companion, you'll have noticed that, we had detailed content on all the pages that were the same in all the booklets. So we had content on the I squared page, the I cubed page, the covers, the charts. Because that content is going to be the same in all of those domains. And then what we have committed to for this coming year is that we are working on creating content for all of the problems on the first 4 pages of every booklet for every domain. And that will take time. So that will roll out throughout the year, but we'll be ahead of everybody. So whatever your community is on week 4, week 4 will be ready for you. But that content will be rolling out throughout the year. Well, thanks everybody for coming and sharing your ideas. It really has been an encouragement just to see how we're all thinking more deeply about how we can challenge our students and challenge ourselves, right, as we are growing in our understanding. And I think that's one of the things that's really exciting. And I think our students are going to be encouraged when they see us wrestling with our understanding, right? So I know that Babs, and I pick on Babs because she's in my master's class, right? But she'll be doing her homework, and what a beautiful picture for her sons to see that their mom is wrestling with these hard ideas, right? And so they aren't now just going, oh, well, I can't wait to be an adult and not have to do work anymore, right? They see that their mom is continuing to wrestle, right? That she's not too proud to use flashcards, right? So sometimes we think, oh, well, I know that. And so Babs is modeling for her sons, right, what it means to continue to practice the grammar, to continue to wrestle with ideas. And so I appreciate everybody on here as we are talking about our own learning, because I think that when we're excited about our learning, our kids are going to get excited about their learning. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
I'd like to put in a quick plug. If any of you haven't gotten to watch Robert and I on the Sean Ryan show, it's not too late and the comments are still helpful. So thank you very much, everybody, and see you next week.
Thank you.